This is ABC Fora.
Like many of you here probably, I was once a smoker. Or am I the only person in that room that has to confess to that? Mine was not a heavy habit, but it was one I couldn't seem to break. The thing was, I knew all the stuff about lung cancer. I knew all the information and I believed it. I knew the scientists were right. But it couldn't stop me smoking. In other words, intellect, information, the smart part of the brain was not enough to stop me lighting up. I'm glad to say I don't smoke now, so something obviously changed, and I can actually remember the moment at which it happened. It was, of course, about a young man that I rather fancied, a bit of a hippie, bit of a health fanatic, and we were getting on famously until one day, absent-mindedly, I lit up in front of him, and I can still see the look on his face. Utter shock, bewilderment, and disgust. He took a step back and I watched him recalibrating his idea of me. And I might add, crossing me off his list of possible girlfriends. What happened in those few seconds of me watching his face was powerful enough to make me do something that no amount of cleverness had made me do. That afternoon, I chucked away the packet of drum and I started running instead of smoking. I'm ashamed to say I don't still run, but at least I don't smoke. So what was it that happened in that moment that let me do something, change my behaviour in a way that I couldn't before? It was something to do with emotion, and specifically the emotional response of empathy. I watched myself through his eyes. I felt myself as disgusting because I felt his disgust as my own. That broke through the walls of resistance that I had developed to the idea of quitting. I'd probably built those walls using, I would guess, calibration and overconfidence bias, just at a guess. That empathy gave me a new perspective, which was not a cognitive one, but an emotional one. So what I think is that nature, in fact, has given us another way, another mechanism, besides the learning from experience one, for making us change. And the way that mechanism works has something to do with emotion. And nature really is amazing. I'm reading James Lovelock's book about Gaia at the moment, which is quite, I don't know whether any of you have read that. It is awe-inspiring in its depiction of the interlockedness of the chemical basis for life. So nature is clever, and she has given us a tool for harnessing that emotional response. And she has provided people who happen to be experts at building just that kind of tool. As you would probably guess, I think that tool is art, and those people skilled at building that tool are artists. A while ago, I was in Canberra walking around one of the parks by the lake, and I came across, I could see it in a distance, obviously some kind of artwork, a series of white poles of different heights. I came closer and I read a sign that told me that it was a memorial to the SIV, that is, Suspected Illegal Entry Vehicle X. When SIV X sank, it took with it, the sign told me, 146 mothers, 142 children, and 65 fathers, all of whom drowned. And the sign proclaimed that our message in making this memorial is that kindness is stronger than fear. It was a powerful sign and a powerful bit of artwork. Yes, I thought, very worthy, very true. How sad. Then I walked closer, and the poles somehow doubled back on themselves to enclose a little bit of grass. And to get close enough to read a second sign, I actually went into that little enclosed space. And the second sign told me this: the SIV X vessel was 20 metres long. The exact dimensions are outlined by these 42 poles. I glanced to the right, where the curving row of poles met, and to the left, where they met at the other end, and realised that I was standing in the middle of a boat that had somehow, along with me, contained 399 other people, all but 47 of whom had drowned. How can I tell you what I felt in that second, which I'm feeling even now, remembering that moment? Rather than give it words like terror, grief, sadness, outrage, etc., let me tell you what happened to me physically. My throat closed so that I wasn't sure that I could go on breathing. Something happened around my middle, a kind of butterflies in the stomach feeling, something sort of tremulous and frantic. My eyes seemed to darken so that the colours of the morning were bleached into black and white. I felt my face lengthen as all the muscles let go and my jaw sagged. The sun was still shining, but I was suddenly very cold. All I wanted to do was to lie down and roll into a ball and howl. Now, all this happened without my choosing. It was an effect that the reading of the numbers had not achieved, nor had the worthy words about kindness. As I stood on that patch of Canberra grass, I went through an experience beyond my control. So what's going on in that moment when art takes us into a place where all normal thinking is suspended? What it feels like is that the brain is turning from one kind of mode to another, as if a switch is thrown, and understanding is finding another path, not the path of cognition, but another more concealed, more obscure, less articulatable one. I learned recently what neuroscience is discovering about how we learn to read. You see, I have become a neuroscience bore. Apparently we're hardwired for language, that's embedded in our brains, but we're not hardwired for reading. So when we're first confronted with the challenge of reading, our brain has no ready-made path for it, as it apparently does for language. What the brain apparently does is run around, I picture a little gnome in there, running around, grabbing useful bits from all the other bits of the brain, the bit that's to do with seeing, the bits that's to do with visualising, all these bits of existing circuitry which are made for other purposes. And that clever little goblin cobbles together those functions and combines them in a new way. And that is how it makes a new tool, if you like, to do this thing called reading. Once we've learnt to read, we no longer have to do that hard work. We don't have to run around every time, because once we've learnt to read, all those little bits and pieces get cobbled together into a permanent new pathway, a shortcut that's called, it's labelled reading. For reading, enter here. So it seems that in the most literal way, learning to read actually creates new brain circuitry, creates a new tool in the neurons. Now, the neuroscientists I was reading did not extrapolate that idea to the art experience, but I am boldly prepared to. Confronted with a rich piece of art, oblique, original, surprising, perhaps even obscure, the brain has no ready-made circuitry to process it. So, as it did with the challenge of learning to read, the brain will run around and put a whole lot of pre-existing circuitry together in new ways. If I'm right, experiencing art can literally create new circuits. New circuits are new ways of thinking, new tools that the brain can then apply to other purposes.
This is ABC Fora.